Well,
You
yeah.
cannot, because you don't have a store and you have to have every ingredient and
That was my other
everything.
explanation
For
besides the flu bug.
10 people for.
I'm just trying to fix what would be more enjoyable being on that. Maybe a 600 house for a week or
Now.
Whatever it was, 4 days, I got
My husband.
sick. I've been sick so many times after you get
I
out.
can easily go to Maui for
But for those of you who get that constantly,
Well,
I can imagine.
meet Tony and just meet Tony.
oh, yeah. No, this
We
is
do well.
10, yeah,
A long time on that though.
we even get a three-bedroom
Many years ago,
house.
I was diagnosed with
Just turned
So
over.
you, the three kids and another family went with you.
Yeah.
my pharmacist.
She's upstairs
How's
in
that?
the foundation.
Oh, right, okay. Never sure they're having it.
And I took 4,800 milligrams a day for the better part of 20 years. I never missed a beat. Now, looking back on that, I don't know
Our
what
first
the doctors
years,
told me.
figured out.
I should have.
Oh, okay.
They didn't know about
We
it.
didn't know
But I
about it.
said it was getting
Longer than that.
got through that. There were no bugs that could live.
How is empty nester doing? One day. It's been one day. We just had dinner before I came here. Dan's like,
So this was the, must be the Greek stuff.
Yes, the WSU move-in day for everybody was Saturday.
Oh,
They
okay.
just have, now, they didn't have this stuff when we were students, but they have like a complicated, whether or not you're going through Greek stuff. They have like a convocation and a welcome and all these different programs type thing. So, especially for the first year when the kids get out of school, you know, on the 15th of June and then, or the 20th, and then they go. So, yeah, so we took him. I spent today fumigating his room.
How are you?
Taking things to the
That's what
garbage.
asked me the other day, he's like, what do you do with my room when I go to college? I'm like, well, leave it as your room for
Yeah,
starters,
yeah.
because you will,
Right.
you're not leaving for good. You'd like to think that.
You know, it's still his room, but he just left it like, you know, he went to the store. You know, there was like a wet towel hanging there and stuff random.
Like he went to the store.
You know, like it wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna put things away before I move. Random, but.
Mom will take care of it.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, there it is. But I did laugh, because Elaine's his third child, but I've traveled his entire life. I told him on the way home, and she was just, I go, I told him 0 things about like how to function on your own. I'm like, I assume he knows how to do laundry, and I assume he'll find the
In the
laundry.
dorm or
He's
in
in
the
a
dorm
dorm.
apartment?
But, you know, like, we told him nothing. We're just like, all right, see ya.
See,
He'll
The
be
first
fine.
one gets all in trouble.
yeah, my kid rented an apartment, so he didn't have to stay in the dorm.
For his freshman year?
Oh, wow. Brady's dorm is nice. That's right. No, he can't live in an apartment because he would die because he doesn't know, he would eat cereal for 3 meals a day.
Or mac and
So
cheese.
living in the dorm, at least he has a dining hall. So in theory, he will not
I'm a
eat
case
cereal.
of that mac and cheese for the
Mountain
microwave.
cereal really serves us well,
It does.
for those of us that don't cook much.
Kirsten lived in the dorm at PLU and for 2 years and then moved her. Those rooms are so tiny. There's so much noise.
Okay, we're gonna, Marcia will come back and we'll start.
Really cheap.
I think she went to the restroom.
Oh.
She's here.
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. To start off, are there any changes to the agenda? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It has been moved by David and seconded by Lori to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda has been approved. We are looking at policy 3110, admission and qualifications of attendance is being presented for a second reading. Is there a motion to adopt policy 3110, admission and qualifications of attendance?
I will so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It has been moved by Marcia and seconded by Leslie to adopt policy 3110, admission of qualifications of attendance. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion has been approved. Move on to 4.2, policy 3200, student rights and responsibilities being presented for a second reading. Is there a motion to adopt policy 3200, student rights and responsibilities?
I'll move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion prior to the vote? All in favor, excuse me, it has been moved by Leslie and seconded by Lori to adopt policy 3200, students' rights and responsibilities. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion has been approved. Procedure 3220, students' rights and responsibilities is being presented for information only. Is there any discussion on this procedure? I think we'll move on. Policy 3241, student discipline is being presented for a second reading. Is there a motion to adopt policy 3241, student discipline?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion prior to the vote? It has been moved by David and seconded by Leslie to adopt policy 3241, student discipline. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion has been approved. Procedure 3241, student discipline is being presented for, again, this is a procedure for information only. Is there any discussion on this procedure? Okay, we will then move on to new business. Policy 7150, system of funds. This is a first reading. Is there any discussion on this policy? Okay, then we'll come back to us for a second reading.
It is nice sometimes with a policy in the first reading to sort of highlight the changes for the rest of the people that are here.
Okay.
We see it and we've gone through it, but, yeah, it has changed, and so there's a difference.
Okay.
And
it's
that could
quite
happen at the
significant.
next meeting. I know you're not prepared to do that tonight, but
And how would you propose that be? To just verbally go over it, or would you like that presented, like bullet point changes?
just
the
a briefing
future.
on what the major changes are,
Can
and,
someone speak to that then,
If I may,
please?
I'll do a sort of an overview, and then any hard questions will go to Karen. I guess the public would recognize that when the legislature and the Supreme Court, state Supreme Court passed McCleary and subsequently the legislative changes, they really changed the finance system in the state of Washington. And subsequently, OSPI was also required to change the accounting process. Several of those changes, including sub-accounts and how to track the levy expenditures, really changed the system of accounting. And this policy, this official board policy, would in fact just update our policy on funds and accounting to put us in concert with the new law. Again, beyond that, I'll defer to Karen to try to, have specific questions on how the accounting and revenue deposits are made, et cetera, and between Karen and Kelly, I'll let them, but in essence, it's a catch-up with the legislature and the OSPI.
And anyone in the public that would like to see the changes in the black line copies can do so, right?
We can get
It'll
a,
be a public document, right?
yes.
So it'll be a public document for viewing. Thank you for the overview, and Marcia, thank you for the suggestion. I don't know that we need to go into it in further detail, but if somebody is interested, they can go refer to those documents are online.
Right, and the biggie is the
Or
capital
request.
projects fund, because we're in the middle of it with a lot of money to spend and any significant changes. I think the board should be aware of that, and I'm seeing those things, and some of those I thought were already in the law, but anyway, yeah, that is good to know. I was kind of surprised to see the fund system as a policy change, so.
It's more in depth.
Right, a lot more detailed than what,
There's a lot more regulations and rules
of course.
and accountability.
Karen, any other high-level things that you'd like to, the board has had a chance to review, but if there's anything you'd like to highlight for the audience?
No, I think it's just, with all the changes that have come about with, the, engrossed House Bill 2242, most of this happened back in 2017, but 2019-20 is the fiscal year when a lot of this goes into enactment. And so we're just updating our policies based on, what we'll be doing.
And that document is provided by the district is redlined, I guess, so we see where the changes are. It's very clear what's deleted and what's added and all of that, so if anyone would like to see that, they can. Thanks, Marcia. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll move on to 5.2, Policy 7230, Revenues of Federal, State, and Other Agencies is being presented again for a first reading. Is there any discussion? Art, can you do the same thing?
In this case, it really is an update to assure that the key part is we have to be in compliance on our handling federal programs and federal funds. And that's your biggest reason for making sure we're also updated, not only with our state, but how we in our budget handle any federal, state and other agency funds. So you'll see in policy 7230, it really, again, and it gives you the changes, but it identifies how the revenues and expenditures are handled, and the enrichment, it speaks specifically to handling the enrichment levy. So there's a new world that we've entered on the enrichment levy and how that should be accounted for in case you were coming at it with federal eyes and trying to look at some of the federal rules.
Thank you for that. Karen, anything else to add to that?
No, that's pretty much it. It's mostly the new, rules regarding enrichment levies and, the steps that the districts need to take in order to pass and, get approval from the SBI. The other piece is that if during an audit, it is deemed that we are not in compliance, then there are processes that we have to go through in order to become compliant. And that's through a state audit. If the state auditors were to come in and say that we weren't spending on enrichment.
So would they potentially look at that at our next annual audit that they do, and may pull that out and look at that?
It goes into place for 1920, so it'll be for the 1920 fiscal year audit,
Okay.
so.
Any other discussion on policy 7230? We will move on to the consent agenda. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda prior to the vote?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a couple of items. 6.4, 6.5, and 6.5, 6, and 7, I'd just like to pull off just for comment. 6.8, I would like to pull off for discussion, and 6.10, I asked a question, and so now I'm just gonna say it publicly about that.
6.10?
6.10.
So do I proceed with the consent agenda without these on there, or do we have these discussions now?
I wasn't clear whether we were actually pulling 6.5, 6.6, and 6.7.
No, it's just for comment.
Comment,
It's not
but-
question.
That's what I
And then
thought.
discussion on
Right. I
6.8
did send
and a comment on, so we won't proceed with approving any part of the consent agenda until we have the comments and discussion? Are you okay
Please.
with that? Okay. So, if there's other people that want to comment or have discussion, please let me know, but let's start with Marcia. Marcia, comment?
Okay, first of all, 6.5 through 7, kudos to Karen and Kelly and the department for catching up the budget status report. I think that's really important for us this time of year. And I think I said at the last board meeting that we're getting a lot of paperwork that may take time for the department to put together, and in reality, we don't need that every month. We get an idea of the enrollment, once or twice a year is probably sufficient to see that, and the other patterns and charts and all the rest. Seeing the budget status reports every month is really good, so thank you.
You're getting us caught up, and then we'll just do that monthly moving forward? Okay, thank you.
Okay, and 6.8, I have two questions. I'm a little concerned about the amount, and it's coming to Gig Harbor High School for improvement of the sound and technology system. And that has also been a big project for Peninsula High School, trying to find a way and going to the legislature for funding. And so I'm going to come back to that equity issue when we accept donations and the equity between schools. And then the second part of my concern about this item in terms of acceptance, it's a two-part, and there's a contingent part, and I'm not comfortable with the second contingency. I think you come back and have that, it's pretty big scope.
So I'm gonna let Art speak to that.
Okay,
because-
sure.
Yeah, just so it's clear what we're talking about, and we purchased the Boys and Girls Club. The Boys and Girls Club had hosted a church for a number of years. Working with the city of Gig Harbor, as we became the owner, that particular building no longer had an exemption from parking. And that may sound like it's insignificant, but the result of that was that we, during this particular phase of this year, operating the Boys and Girls Club, we're limited in the number of people who can be in the gymnasium, in that room. In essence, disenfranchise that church and put them on the street. But in talking with them, they were ready to grow and move, and have been very wonderful really to work with. And we worked out that they would like to move to Gig Harbor High School as their host building. And in return, it wasn't something we requested, but they wanted to install a sound system and vision comparable to what they were used to as in their services at the Boys and Girls Club. We then have been working with them for probably the better part of 3 months to make sure that what they were asking for and interested in really had to flow through the school district in terms of both the conditions and who was that it would be our bid and our property, and they could make the donation, but they couldn't make those kind of improvements to our facility without it being the school district. So it's particularly unique to them moving within the system, our purchasing the Boys and Girls Club, then the move to Gig Harbor, and the fact that they were willing to pay the expenses of installing the system that they wanted to use in the auxiliary gym. And what you're seeing is the end result of that in terms of, I don't know if that answers all of the questions, but that's why it is in the amount it is, and typically you wouldn't see a donation of that amount for express purpose like this. But when the school district has someone that offers, then the next step is for the school district to determine if in fact that donation and the use would be fully compliant with rules, regulations, any mandates and requirements from the state or our own rules. And in this case, we made sure that it was. And Patrick Gillespie has worked with the church in great detail to make sure that everything was compliant with our electrical system and really that it would be ours. And I'm very comfortable saying that in fact with the amount of vetting we've done and how to do this will be consistent with the school district. In terms of the question does that cause an inequity with some other building, whether it's PHS or other, this is not being installed in the main gym, it's not being installed in an auditorium, it's being installed in the auxiliary gym. And if Peninsula High School had a donor, whether that was the state or somebody else that was interested, we'd certainly work them through the same process of trying to determine what was to be done and what was the reason for it, and is it consistent, and does it meet our material standards. And so I guess I'd recommend it as both legal, appropriate, and while we didn't say to them you have to, if you do one building, you have to do every building, that I don't think would have been reasonable. We have had a good relationship with our local churches in terms of some use our chairs and rent that, some bring in their own chairs every week, and you see the truck back up and do that. And there's a variety of ways in which the churches have been accommodated in the school district. This particular church, before they rented from the Boys and Girls Club, used to rent from the school district, and I think we had at least a 7-year relationship with them that was very satisfactory. So
Yeah, Goodman, is that the one that was at Goodman?
yes,
And also Peninsula High
They were
School.
also at Peninsula High School.
probably installed some of the sound system there, which now needs replacing if they're so inclined.
A question about this, will they be doing the installation, or their
No.
contractors, or are we managing the installation and they're giving us the money to do
I
the
think
installation?
in a way, most organizations out there, including this church, don't necessarily understand how you have to do business. So they would have been happy to do it because I think they could have done it cheaper. But there's a very specific law that does not allow us to subcontract out. So it has to be done with state rules. And example would be prevailing wages. The school district always has to pay prevailing wages on its projects, and the bidders have to comply with the state requirements. If a private contractor had done that and could do it, they undoubtedly could do it cheaper and they could pay less than prevailing wages, but the law does not permit that. So that actually was part of the process that we made sure that they understood it had to flow through the school district and the school district rules.
And although
I would say, is anybody else, are you gonna speak?
Well, Leslie was
Oh,
saying.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't hear.
I
you.
was just gonna say that, just to be clear, we are grateful for the donation and their generosity, but also understanding that they are in reiterating that they are still complying with our school district and building rules and policies. It does not give them necessarily priority of usage, nor are we under any other further obligations. Is that correct?
And it is a donation to the
Yes.
school district, so
Which
should
we are
they
grateful.
leave next month, we would still say thank you.
Absolutely.
But it would be a school district property and building. obviously, they're not gonna come in unless there's a reasonable expectation on their part that they'll be allowed to stay in. Yeah, they have been a good partner with us.
Also, I think it's important to note that this group owns this AV equipment that's at the Boys and Girls Club, which has now become,
I saw
you know,
that.
Pioneer Elementary. So, you know, the part of the cost is just removing the equipment that they already own to move it to another building. Both
Right.
buildings are technically now owned by the school district, but,
Right,
so that's.
yeah, I saw that, I guess.
David, you had a
Yeah,
comment?
thanks. I was just gonna say, I think we're, as a school district, we should feel blessed that we're getting this equipment, considering that the HEC has had a long relationship with the school district at Peninsula and Goodman and now at Gay Arbor High School. And they're certainly not the only church in the Peninsula School District that uses our facilities. And since we are the one that put them on the street, you know, I think that it's, I don't really see it as an equity piece, other than the fact that they're moving and they're just moving their equipment that they've been using out of our facility and just moving it somewhere else. So I think in the future, another church that's renting a facility might be just as generous and donate some to the school district in the future, so.
It's surprising the size of the donation
It's
is.
serious.
I mean, the
Yeah.
installation
Yeah,
cost
it's
is
a great
just-
sound
AV
system.
costs,
Yeah.
yeah, they're expensive.
I also,
Not the AV
So-
cost, but the installation.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
but I also think, to Marcia's point, it was important that we had the conversation so the public understands as far as the equity piece. It was a very generous donation from a private donor. Okay?
And I would join Ms. Harris in saying the sound system at PHS is crummy, to use a professional term. It really is in need, and I had the pleasure of attending my first performance over there last year, and as the sound system cut in and out, and the young lady that was in particularly being cut out about half the time, to me deserved an award just for the graceful, beautiful way. I don't know if she was prepared for it because it does it all the time, or whatever, but I can't imagine not showing some frustration, and she did a beautiful job. I know that there are some patrons in the community who have approached the legislature. They would certainly approach anybody in the community that wanted to assist in upgrading the sound system at PHS, and we'd be happy to talk to them about how it would
Thank you.
happen. So
Yeah,
I guess that's a direct solicitation in case anybody's out there. But the reality is, it's an old system, and it's pretty badly in need. So this one will make them kind of, I guess, wish, but it's not one where I would recommend that we turn this one down, because they're
Get that.
both bad systems.
Thank you for bringing that up about Peninsula, because I think that's
They
a
would-
discussion we've had in the past.
They
so
would love to
appreciate that.
find a partner.
Yep.
And I think Hugh,
Yeah,
would.
yes.
if Hugh could do it, he will
He
find
He will.
somebody
He'll
out there.
He'll figure it out now that you've put it out there, so. Any other discussion on 6.8? Okay, Marcia, you also had a comment on 6.10.
no, I
No.
don't.
Okay. Because numbers are there.
Right, I noticed that. I didn't see that before. Yes, they are.
Yep, they're there, so.
Thank you.
That's the Sodexo contract, so we're looking at the price of lunches, and we wanted to look at historical numbers versus what we are going to be paying going forward. So we, as a board, have that information now, so.
And it is a conversion rate for equivalent meals, so, right?
Yep,
So,
absolutely. Okay, with that, are there any other comments or discussion on the consent agenda? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
also move.
Second.
It has been moved by Marcia and seconded by David to approve the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The consent agenda has been approved. We'll now move into our study session, and the study session will be led by Karen Andersen, presenting the budget and finance to the board.
Alrighty. Okay, there's a lot of slides. I'll walk you through everything. Just want to preface that. I do want to let you know that behind the presentation, There is a budget summary document and also a detailed forecast for you to look at.
I memorized this.
If you want a copy of the budget, which is 125 pages, let me know, and we will get that to you. So, I also wanted to let you know that Kelly Pearson, the Director of Finance, she's going to be presenting some of the other funds. So, just wanted to add that too. So,
Here in that 120-page budget.
Yes.
Is that something that can be accessible online as well?
yes, it will be posted once we adopt, once
Yep.
you adopt the budget.
Okay.
Then we will post the official budget document.
Thanks.
So, and we'll post the presentation and then also the resolution.
So thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
One clarification I'll make will be, the study session is to give the board a chance to just learn and ask any questions that you may have and discuss it. We will come back to you on the 22nd with both a need at that point for a budget hearing, and you've been through that process before. And then after the budget hearing has been closed, we will recommend the budget for adoption for the coming school year. So in a way, there's three official parts: the study session, the budget hearing, and then the budget adoption.
And then before you start, Karen, just a reminder to all of us that we do have our mics, and make sure that we're using those so that everyone can hear. Please, thank you.
I think these are just for the streaming, because it's not amplified.
That's correct. Is that correct? Still, please speak into the mic so we have it on and anyone can hear. And speak up so the audience can hear here. Thank you.
So I'm going to walk you through our slides. I'm not going to read all the numbers to you, but I will highlight things that we want you to be aware of. We're going to start with the general fund. Oh, I've got to turn on. It's on now. We're going to start with the general fund. That's our largest fund. That's our day-to-day activities and operations. Starting with enrollment and what we're seeing as current year, what we had anticipated and where we ended up with total students coming in at 8704.65, just a little over the budget.
If I may tease Ms. Anderson for a minute, I've seen technical projections, but talk about exact. She projected a year ago 8702. It became 8704.65 on average students. So she missed it by 2.65 student average for the entire year.
Not me, my team.
I have to be impressed. That is impressive.
She's got some other hidden talents.
Well, if you look further down, our big surprise again was Running Start this year. It took another jump of 30-some students. So we ended up with an annual average for this year of 9,122.79. Going forward into 2019-20, we are projecting 9,190 students. Looking at Running Start, we're going to jump them up a little bit. Peninsula Internet Academy, we're going to put at 50. Our latest change has been in kindergarten. We started out at 580, then we quickly moved to 600, and last week we changed it to 640, and we are at 645 right now. The challenge that we
With
have...
current enrollment right now, we already
Right.
at that?
Right, we have 645 students registered in kindergarten.
Is that so unusual with a new school being built and renovations happening?
It is unusual. It's our highest kinder that we've ever had, that I know of. And we've had 3 years of high kinders. So we are growing in the elementaries. We are shrinking in the secondary schools. So the middle schools are a little bit lower this next year, and that's because we have a 5th grade moving into 6th grade that is small. But the grades, K-5 are all starting to get up there, and so we're gonna see this moving into the middle schools, and then it'll move into the high schools. But it's gonna take a little bit of time before that actually starts to happen.
The second part of Leslie's statement was interesting in that, because while we've seen increased enrollment in kindergarten over the last several years, the fact that we now are going to be building new schools, I wonder if that's going to attract even more families that they
It
would
might.
otherwise choose a different option, so it's a
It
good.
might.
I think it typically does, I'm curious.
Yeah.
There's one other factor I would mention. 11 years ago, the recession hit in 2008. And for the next 7 years, there was a pretty healthy decline in the enrollment in the school district year by year, as houses were kind of frozen or underwater, couldn't sell, and young families couldn't qualify for loans, et cetera. So what you're seeing at the high school right now in the secondary is really still the result of those smaller and shrinking classes moving through the system. And then as we get these last 3 large kindergartens, and now this year being the largest of all, and they move through that elementary system, they will be hitting with a vengeance. But fortunately for us, I guess if you had to suffer that 2008 situation, they will have vacated some room in the secondary just ahead of the bow wave. The bow wave will fill it up, but at least it's not hitting high on high, it's hitting the new high on low. So I guess I'm just saying that as a grateful superintendent that we have a little bit of room and place to put some of our secondary kids as these kids get older.
But I'd say that small wave going through is already pretty well through,
Oh,
because
yeah.
our kindergarten, our 5th grade
Yeah.
classes are
Yeah.
increasing quite a bit too, right?
Starting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And we have some anomalies that are coming about. What we're seeing is Artendale is way over projections. We didn't anticipate that they would grow as much as they are, and they're higher than what we had originally projected. So we're seeing most of our elementary schools are right at or above projections. We're down at Purdy, and we're down at Minter Creek. But everyone else is above projections or right at projections right now. So that's a good sign. We've got a little bit more time before.
Are we down at Purdy because we kind of moved kids over to Discovery, Ardendale, and Harbor Heights? Or are we letting kids back into that are moving in that? Because wasn't it the only development on, across from one of the Canord entrances?
We're gonna start capping classes at Discovery, we're gonna be capping classes at Voyager, we're gonna be shifting kids wherever we have space. Because we're getting to the point where we have no more classrooms, so we're gonna have to start shifting and moving kids. And so Purdy could take some, so
Okay.
Artendale can, Harbor Heights can, so it just depends on the grade level.
All right.
But that's what we're looking at right now. And then right now, we're looking at the secondary schools, 9 through 12, we're looking at mostly head count. We don't know what that's gonna translate to FTE, full-time equivalents. And the big unknown is what's gonna happen with Running Start students. And is there gonna be another jump or what? And that takes away from our in-house enrollment.
So I think we're getting into a little bit of an enrollment discussion.
Yep.
Any other questions on enrollment pertaining to the budget?
Is there any kind of, since you brought it up, TCC as far as absorbing our Running Start students, is there any kind of capacity issue that they would have if, like, say we went from 370 to 450? I mean, does TCC have a limit of how many they can accept, or can they go elsewhere for Running Start? I know TCC is where a lot of them go.
Most of them go to TCC, but we do have 3 other schools that are serving Running Start.
Okay,
So, yeah.
All
very
right.
good. Okay,
We'll go back to budget here.
thank you.
Visual, this is a visual of where we're at. This is just in the building, but this is kind of, you can see the trend where, as Art was talking about, how we were declining, and then we plateaued in 15, 16, and now we've had steady growth for the last 4 years. So, as we talk about our funding, in the last couple of years, we've highlighted our salary funding factors. This is the big change for McCleary. And back in 2017-18, you can see what our funding factors looked like. And then when we had regionalization, which came in last year with 12% regionalization, this next year, all of those factors have been inflated by IPD, which is 2%, with the exception to the certificated. Because we had a high staff mix in 2017-18, we got an additional 4% in regionalization funding, and that will hit in 2019-20. So that increases our certificated funding factor by the 6%, the 2% IPD, and then the 4% regionalization, additional regionalization. Just so that you have an idea, perspective-wise, we've always talked about our levies were funding a lot of staff, and basically, if we were being supported by BEA dollars and we were fully funded, then they should be paying for all of our staff. So you can see what has changed and what the mix has changed. So back in 2017-18, certificated staff, the levy funded 21%. Our certificated administration, the levy funded 56%. Classified, they were funding 51%. Now, because we have more state funding to accommodate, and because of these funding factors, the levy now supports 11% of our certificated staff, 36% of our certificated administrative staff, and about 27% of our classified staff. So moving forward to our revenues, I'm going to share with you, these are changes from budget to budget. So we're going to compare what happened from last year's budget to this year's, this upcoming budget.
Did you skip a slide? No.
No?
She's on this one.
Oh.
There.
Weird staple, okay, sorry. Okay,
So, local taxes, there was a change. We increased by 216,000. Local non-tax, this is tuitions, class fees, E-rate, investment earnings. That has increased by 204,000. Our state apportionment, remember again, we've got the 2% and the 4% regionalization. That increased by $6.5 million. State programs increased by 2.5. Federal programs increased by 317,000, and no increases to the other. So total increases to revenue from budget to budget was about $9.8 million. So when we look at our levy, I tried to build a visual. So we have a voter approved.
Sorry, it's so cool.
We have a voter approved levy amount for 2020 of $27,690,000. This year with the legislature, they changed what we could collect. Last year we were reduced to $1.50 per $1,000 of assessed value. This year, the legislature with ESSB, 5313, they made a change to the $1.50. They moved the $1.50 to $2.50 per $1,000 of assessed value. Because we have such a high assessed value, that would generate about $35 million. Compared to 2,500 plus IPD, so it comes out to 2,550 for this next year, times our prior year enrollment, which remember was, I believe it was 9122.79. So if you look at that, you can take the lesser of. Well, now we're in the bracket of the 2,500 per student FTE. So looking at that, if we go forward, we come out that we're projecting for the calendar year of 2020, we would levy $23 million, a little over $23 million. And then we have to break it between the fall collection and the spring collection, and that generates what we will get for our fiscal year 2019-20. Any questions?
So just to be clear, we're not collecting at $2.50. We're
No.
now going to the the
Yes.
$25.50 per FTE
Yes.
based off of last year,
Yes.
which
And
is
what-
a reduction of about $4 million.
It's a rollback of about $4.3 million.
From what voters approved.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, what will happen is that the board will need to certify later, we will need to certify later in November what we're going to collect in 2020.
Okay.
If you remember last year, we weren't sure what $1.50 per $1,000 of assessed value was because we didn't know what assessed value was for the year. So we will probably do the same type of resolution where we will ask for what we can, the 27 million, knowing that the treasurer assessor has to go through that calculation. OSPI will provide them with the enrollment information. They'll go through both calculations and they'll apply and levy the dollar amount that's applicable to us. That will generate a rate, a tax rate that folks will see. They won't see the $2,550 per, they'll see the dollar amount, that's what we'll collect, but they will see a tax rate. And that tax rate, depending on what happens with assessed value, could be at $1.50 per $1,000 of assessed value, or it could be under. But in all likelihood, it's gonna be under.
So our resolution will still show the 27 million that voters approved, but then when they go back to calculate it, it'll do a rollback and it'll reduce it down to 23 or whatever
Right.
that amount is.
Right.
And that was based off also a recommendation from our Community Finance and Audit Committee as well, right?
Correct.
That they wanted to take
Correct.
that approach.
Yeah. So when you adopt the budget, you are adopting, you will see that there is a page of the amount that you're going to levy. And that amount currently is the 23.3 million that we've calculated. But we will, because we already have a voter approved, we will ask the treasurer collector, tax collector to go through the calculations. Just in case there's a change to enrollment, there might be a last minute adjustment, and it's basically rubber stamped and put in cement as of August 31st, and that's shared with the treasurer, with all of the counties, so they can go through the calculations. They'll also know what the actual assessed value for 2019 is that they can levy. So,
It's good visual, thank you.
So are
That's
you
fine.
expecting that the board will need to come back and maybe adjust the amount that can be collected? We're not going to do the 27 million that's in the levy,
We're gonna ask for the 27
Okay,
million and force
and then
them
we'll
to
do
go
a
through the
rollback.
calculation.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes.
I would just add one quick comment. You've noted that the federal programs and federal funding continues to drop for This district, we're basically less than 3% now of federal.
So on the next slide, this is actually what we're projecting for our revenue budget.
3.14.
We've got our local taxes at $22 million, our local non-tax at $3.3 million. Our state apportionment is coming in at $85.9 million. Our state programs, $22.3 million. Our federal programs, $4.3 million. Our other, this is our little contingency that we have, plus some other government agency grants, for a total revenue of $139 million. And this is a visual. So as you can see, the state gives us the bulk of our funding. Our local taxes come in at about 16%, and the rest is made up by federal and the non-local. For our expenditures, we had to look at our bargaining agreements. We increased our our expenditures for salaries and benefits based on bargaining agreements. The majority of our agreements were IPD for the 2019-20 school year. The implicit price deflator is 2%. We had some changes in benefit costs. The biggest change for us this next year is SEB, and that's the School Employees Benefit Board. That is a change in full-time benefits. Eligibility is 630 hours as opposed to what it used to be, which was 1440. So we have a lot more employees that are going to be eligible for benefits, including substitutes. And that's any substitute. That's teacher subs, bus driver subs, custodial subs, clerical subs. So we went back and we looked at all of our subs over the last 2 years and kind of got an idea of what that cost might be. There's about 15 to 20 building subs that we have in our buildings on a permanent basis, so they'll be eligible for benefits. We have about 3 to 5 bus drivers, sub-bus drivers that put in over 630 hours. We have some aquatic staff supervisors that they put in a little bit more, so we're gonna have to look at that. So we're just kind of anticipating what's happening, but that is the biggest cost increase for benefits.
Are they eligible for those benefits prior to them hitting the 630 some hours?
No, they'll go in, they'll start, so we go into SEB on January 1st, 2020.
Okay.
So if they're close to 630, then we'll have them sign up. But if and when they become eligible, they become eligible the first of the next month. So,
Because they'll hit their hours,
Yes,
thus
yes,
creating a
yes.
eligibility requirement. Okay.
The other program that started up mid-year last year was the Washington Paid Family Medical Leave. That is, not all of our groups were paying into that because it was based on when you settled your bargain. And so we had some groups that were they had settled prior to this going into effect, and so they will start paying in 2019-20. Because their contracts, they settled, so drivers and clerical, they'll start paying this tax. On January 1st, 2020, people can start taking the medical leave. 2018-19, we were paying in, we'll continue to pay in, but now they can be eligible to start taking it as of January 1st.
Karen, back to medical, just to be clear, if somebody's eligible, the district pays a portion and the employee also then pays a portion, right? It's not fully
So the
funded.
district pays 100% for everyone,
Okay,
okay? What happens is that there's a pooling up at the state level, so it's a state level pooling. That sets the rates for the premiums that individuals are selecting.
mhm,
So it's a set number of premiums, and there is an out-of-pocket cost for every employee. So they're forcing a 3-to-1 ratio, so a single person will pay this, and a family will not pay 3 times more than that.
okay.
So they're setting it that way. If I have an individual that is eligible for benefits, decides not to take medical, they can opt out of medical, but we're still paying a full premium into the state. That creates that pooling so that they've got the set rates for premiums. But all employees will have out-of-pocket.
I know a lot of companies, before you can get 100% paid FMLA or short-term disability, you have to have tenure with the company. Like mine, you have to be there for 5 years before you get 100%. Is this immediate, this from day one?
So we started paying in January 1st of 2019. So we started paying, and employees started paying. There's an employer share and an employee share. In January 2020, that's when they can start claiming. So
What I'm
there
saying-
isn't
I'm talking about the hire new employee on first day.
Vested,
Nope.
vested.
They're vested immediately?
Yep, they're vested immediately.
Okay.
Yeah,
So what's the increased cost for us from previous years?
so I'll
Because of-
share that with you.
Okay. I jumped into that, I'm sorry.
And just some other changes, we did have some retirement rates for state teachers' retirement rate, and the PERS rate went up, and the SERS rate went down slightly. We did have a change, I'm coming to
No,
your
yeah,
slide.
that's
We did have a change in staffing, so this is a comparison of from budget to budget, what happened in staffing. We did increase staffing by 15 FTE at the certificated level, and at the classified level, we increased by 12. Keeping in mind that because this is budget to budget, some of this FTE could have occurred last year during the school year as the needs arose. So if we had added any teachers after school started or just before school started and the budget was already set, it could have been that we had hired them last year. I'm just comparing budget to budget, not actual to budget.
But we're not seeing any increase yet for the new schools. Mind you, a lot of the teachers will move over, so it's not gonna be 100% increase for the new
Right,
schools.
we did
but-
add some, we did add an office manager, a health tech,
Custodian.
a custodian, I think a couple of custodians, a
Okay.
night and a day custodian. We have one additional principal. We hired two, but they're both split funded because someone is going to be on duty at Pioneer Elementary, even though it's being handled as the Discovery Annex this next year. So there was some additional staffing due to that school. So changes over prior year. So we had an increase of $6 million, $6.6 million for salaries. And here's, you're gonna see the big impact on SEB. It was 5.2 an increase over prior year. So even though we added staff, SEB is the big piece here. It was at least a $2.5 million hit to us without state funding. We made some adjustments within material supplies and other operating costs. We were able to reduce some of our personal services within special education. They actually have hired all their open positions, and so that does reduce some of that. And there were some other tweaks that we've made along the way. So there is actually a reduction from one year to the next in all the other MSOC. So overall changes was $9.9 million. So let's talk a little bit about our, quote, enrichment levy spending plan. We wanted to make sure that we were identifying expenditures that would meet the enrichment qualifications. And so we kind of looked at it in a little bit different way. We have staffing allocations that are over the state-funded FTE. So basically, the state goes through their prototypical funding model, and they calculate what they're going to fund based on the enrollment. We allocate staff based on buildings, and there's not a perfect size to fit everything. And so we actually staff higher than what we're state funded. And so the cost to us, to the levy, and that the levy supports is about $8.8 million. The percentages that I'm sharing there, I think I shared with you earlier, based on what the levy is supporting for each of those classifications. We also are underfunded in special education by $3.4 million. Now, we've always been underfunded in special education, but before, what was happening is that we were using BEA dollars, and then levy was supporting more of the state. So there's this understanding of, is it BEA, is it state, or is it levy? So we just want to put it out there that there is an underfunding of special education, and at this point, it's about $3.4 million. So at this point, levy is helping to support whatever that is. Extracurricular activities and athletics has always been considered enrichment, and it will remain, and that is about $2.1 million. Professional development, all of our professional development, except for the 2 state-funded LID days that employees within the state funding that we provided, the rest of it is all provided by the levy at $2.3 million. Maintenance and safety projects is at $1.3 million. Supplies and equipment, there's a lot of different pieces. There's technology devices, students, one-to-one devices. We have support service equipment where we buy vehicles and maintenance vans and food service trucks and tractors and lawnmowers. We have a furniture replacement fund for all of the schools. We have instructional materials that we allocate out to the buildings, library allocations, textbooks, emergency supplies, assessment. All of that comes to about $3.7 million. And then we have supplemental instructional support. We pay for communities and schools. We pay for intervention programs, after-school activity runs, WE Day, junior achievement, and midday transportation to the tune of about $416,000. So overall, our enrichment, again, is at $22.3 million. So we're looking at it a little bit differently than we have in the past. We've looked at it by board goal in the past. Now we're looking at it more as what are enrichment activities and how will they be supported. So our expenditures at this point are coming in. Our certificated salaries are $62.2 million. Classified salaries are $20.6 million. Our health benefits, our employee benefits are coming in at $34.4 million. Supplies are at $9 million. purchased services are at $15 million. We have a small travel budget of $273,000, and we have a capital outlay of $218,000. Capital outlay is mostly vehicles. It might be maintenance vans or motor pool vans or some of those support service pieces of equipment. Total expenditures is $142 million. And this is what it looks like visually. Keeping in mind that salaries and benefits are creeping up, and they now consume 82.5% of our budget, whereas last year I believe we were close to 80, so it is creeping up slightly. So here's a summary of general fund. We have our we have to go through and figure out where we think we're going to end with the current year, 2018-19. We still have the end of August, and then we start our year-end closing activities, and some of it goes into August and some of it goes into September, and it's kind of a balancing act. But at this point, we're projecting that we think we're going to end the year 2018-19 with $11 million in fund balance. 4.6 of that will be restricted, and the other will be 6.4. So we're staying within our board goal of 4 to 6%. With that estimate, start beginning fund balance of $11 million, add the revenues of 139, take away the expenditures of 142 million. We're estimating an ending fund balance of $8 million. And that is basically, we're wiping out any carryovers that we might have and basically spending everything. And we've got carryovers built in of about $2.5 million.
Question.
Yes.
So, looking at it the way I see it right there, we're spending more than we're taking in. What's the sustainability of that? What's your 4-year projection? I mean, I call that deficit spending, but I'm just saying if we're spending $3 million more than we're taking in per year, what's our sustainable long term for that?
So keep in mind that what we do is we build in carryover capacity, the $2.5 million. So there's actually $2.5 million that is carryover, so that I can allow folks to spend. If they spent all of their carryover, then there wouldn't be any more. So if you look at, if you look at the next slide, you can get an idea that without that carryover, if I take the carryover out of my expenditures of $142 million, I'm closer to my revenues. My revenues are at 139. My expenditures would be at 140 million. So I'm closer in that. I'm taking from fund balance any carryover. So if I spent it all, it wouldn't be there, and we wouldn't have the need. So basically, that's the way we're building our budget, is that capacity. Typically, we always have carryover. What happens is that when we get to the 4-year forecast, and I can share that with you, I think that's coming up. That's okay. What happens is that you have to make the assumption that if it's not there in the next fund balance, then you're not going to take it. You're not going to be able to use it.
For carryover, just because I find this interesting, can you give us an example of why someone would carry over their budget to next
So
year?
we give allocations out to the buildings for supplies, and we give them to the departments for various things. If they don't spend all of it, we allow them to carry that over and add to the next budget. There might be something that they're saving for, and they want to save up so that they can get something bigger. So it could be, and we just don't want them to spend. We would rather that they spend and be wise about what they're purchasing. And so we always seem to have carryover, and our buildings tend to be frugal. So.
Stress at the top.
So this is basically the components of the ending fund balance, and as you can see, when we budget no carryover. We still have our maintenance contingency. We have increased our uninsured risks. That is our self-insurance amount that we've sent out to our third-party carrier. And that will go away, because once we move into SEB, we will no longer be self-insured. And then we have the unexpendable, which is our inventory. So we budget minorly. We don't take it out. If we have it left over, it drops in when we close the books. And we build that carryover into our budget so that we can spend it the next year if we need to. So, with all of our funds now, we have to start using a 4-year forecast. And so we take the beginning budget for 2019-20 and we spread it out. And this is where we start to look at what's going to happen with enrollment, what's going to happen with staffing to accommodate the enrollment. So you can see that we are increasing enrollment, not by a lot, but we are steadily increasing. We continue to increase. And we will need to increase staffing to accommodate that. So as you go out, once you get out to 22, 23, it's very difficult to say this is what's going to happen. So we're a little bit more conservative and not making a lot of changes out there. For our local levy, we anticipated that we're going to stick with, we're probably going to be subject to the $2,500 per student FTE unless they make another change next year. And so we did some calculations going forward, making the assumption that we would go out for a levy in the future, February of 2020, and that we would be subject to the $2,500 per student FTE.
What percentage of assessed value increases are you looking at? How are you projecting that? 3%, 6%?
Well, we increased by 11% this last year. If we increased, I believe when we did our bond structure, we were looking at 6% increase. I believe it's going to be over 9. At 9, our levy would be under $1.50.
Yeah. Are you projecting 9 then for this presentation? I know sometimes we
No, I
project it
did.
more
I
conservative
did
than
per
that.
student. It's not about
Oh,
assessed value
that's
now.
right.
It's per
Okay.
student.
That's right.
Yeah. So that's
Sorry,
going
I'm
to be
so
the
sorry.
challenge. That's going to be the challenge that we have going forward, is how do we build our levy?
And we gotta get in the
and what do
mindset
we look
per
at?
student now, not
Yeah.
assessed value
Yeah.
anymore.
As long as it stays at $2.50 per $1,000 of assessed value, we'll never be eligible for that. That will always be the higher amount.
I know it's harder as you go years out and you're being conservative there, but a jump in 150 kids, but no jump in staff.
On
5
which
per
one?
kid.
Going from 2021-22 to 2022-23, we're going from 9,500 students to 9,600 students. Certified staff and classified staff are the same.
I think, did I do that right?
Might be a typo.
I'll go back and look at that, because I didn't think that we had grown. I thought we were down. I'll have to look at the enrollment, because, let me check on that one, because I didn't think that we were growing as much. We are, okay. So we can make a change. We can make an adjustment to that. Because you're right, there would be additional staff needs. So, yeah.
Sorry, I
Nope,
Just
that's
saw
fine,
that for the first
that's
time.
fine. We can make an adjustment and we can bring it back to you. We're not asking to adopt yet.
Okay. It's discussion.
And when we adopt the budget, we're adopting the forecast as
You
well?
you are. In the resolution, you'll be adopting the budget expenditure plans, and then you'll also be adopting the four-year forecasts.
And the levy spending plan.
Yes, we will have a levy spending plan for you.
I would just add to that, in adopting the forecast and the forecast itself, that is a forecast. It's not
Right.
anything that locks us into those numbers, other than that's a public document to say, this is our four-year forecast as best we can do it. I think the legislative intent was to make sure the school districts gave a glimpse to the public of what was happening, particularly for those districts that were gonna struggle in their financial stability, that was clearer than it perhaps ever has been. The foible is still a foible of trying to project 5 years out of what's happening with finances and declare that as truth.
And this is a new requirement, so this,
We did this last year, we
but
started
that
it
was
last year,
was the
but
first
yes.
year. Newer
So when we bring it forward for a budget adoption, I'll highlight any changes that we have in that fourth year for general fund.
Okay, thank you.
So we looked conservatively at increases. We did some calculations for the local levy funds, mainly based on, like I said, the 2,500 for student FTE, prior year student FTE. Not huge increases in local non-tax. For the state funding, we were looking at IPD increases, and IPD over the next couple of years is, I believe, it's 2.1, 2.1, and 2%. So not significant changes, and we were also looking at enrollment increases and making adjustments for that. For the federal, we don't see increases much in federal. They don't. If anything, they're going down. So we pretty much left them level. The same thing for the other. That hasn't really fluctuated very much in the last few years. So as you can see, the biggest increases are at the state, and that's mainly driven by enrollment with IPD.
Non-tax, that includes impact fees?
No, impact
Where's
fees go
impact
into
fees?
capital projects fund. So
Sorry.
local non-tax would be any class fees,
Thank
tuition,
Let's say
investment earnings,
Okay.
any of those types of things, rental fees, donations, any of those
So
types of
the impact fees
things.
don't go in the general fund,
Yeah.
like in the capital project, sorry, we're done.
That's okay. For expenditures, taking the first year and then moving forward, we projected approximately a 3% increase to expenditures, and then we took out the carryover. So we adjusted for carryover and then moved forward as far as where we started and where we're moving to. We also looked at enrollment increases and adjustments for that. So overall, keeping in mind that the excess, you'll see the excess in the current year is, we're taking away 2.9. Remember that 2.5 of that is actually carryover. If we don't have that carryover, we won't spend that carryover. And so in the future, we're not reducing. So we're closer to our revenues and expenditures going forward. And that would be something that we would want to maintain. So that's kind of where we're at.
That goes back to David's question. Like,
Yes, yes.
Are we solvent? Can we sustain?
Mm-hmm. We are a lot closer to revenues and expenditures than we have in previous years. We've tended to have higher expenditures than revenues, and we've kind of really strapped it down.
Yeah.
Curious about.
I think I say no a lot.
Curious about the vocational budgets over the 4 years.
Mhm.
They're very close together for the 3 years. And then there's a fairly notable jump in 22, 23. And just curious, it looks like it's out of pattern.
$100,000
Right.
increase over the 20, 30,000.
Right, yeah, like 150 almost. So
Yeah, I think what's happened is that we have not seen an increase in student FTE. And so the anticipation would be that as your high schools, as you have more students coming into the high schools, that might pick up. And so I think we were kind of looking at the student enrollment and where it was landing, and that would generate some additional funds as we get out there, because they'll start to hit in increases. Any other questions on general fund? Take a look at these, and if you have any questions, you can definitely call us. We can make changes, we can make adjustments, and then we can, when we bring it back to you for budget adoption, we can definitely highlight where we're making changes.
Okay. Other questions on the general fund? Comments?
Clear as mud.
Well, the next section's gonna be new to us.
So, capital projects fund. So, a lot of activity going on in the capital projects fund. I don't believe we're gonna have to do a budget extension this next year, because we threw a lot of money into this budget. We've had a couple of years where we had to do budget extensions multiple times. But, we've got a lot of funding there, and we've got a lot happening. So, starting with this year, with the sale of the bonds, you'll see that our revenues are at, we revised the budget, and so our revenues came in, we're estimating that they're coming in at $86 million. We believe we're gonna spend about $15 million at this point, with an ending balance of $75 million. $70 million of that is bond proceeds. So we have to keep everything separate in this fund, and so we track the impact fees separately, city and county, and also the bond proceeds. The assigned to fund purposes, that, I believe that was funding from a sale of property a long time ago. And it's just the balance, the residual of what we haven't spent. So
again, the bond proceeds are in this capital project fund, which then goes only to construction. It doesn't touch any of the people. Okay.
correct. So we have 4 capital projects that are occurring. The 4 schools are in process. Pioneer will be the first to probably start construction, but they're all gonna start in 2019-20. With the cash flow, the way that we have it, we don't believe we're gonna do a sale of bonds prior to the end of the 19-20 fiscal year. We will sell bonds in 2020, but it might be more like September, October when we sell them. If we think that we need to, if the market looks good and we think that we need to change that, then we'll definitely do that. But I don't believe it will change our expenditure plan. Right now, we've got enough there that we can continue to go through, but we'll be running out of money with that many schools under construction. So expenditures are at about $67.7 million, with an estimated ending balance of $10 million, which would leave us with about $3.6 million in the bond proceeds.
And Karen, just clarification, I know what you meant. And when we were saying we were running out of money, it's the first initial bond
first-
sale.
the
We have,
first- yes.
we have more
Yes.
bond,
Yes,
Yeah.
we only
funding.
sold
We're not-
85 million
Okay.
of the
Yep.
198,
Yep.
550. So,
we're not running out of,
so as you can see, as you look at the, if you continue to look at where we're at in 2020, 21, we look at selling another $70 million in bond proceeds. So you'll see that in the revenues. And then the balance would be the following fiscal year in 2021, 2022. So that's where you can see where we would continue to sell bonds, and then we would continue to expend them over the years. And most likely next summer, we will start to look at some of the emergent need projects that need to start. We need to prioritize and start looking at those also, not just the 4 new schools. All right, it's Kelly's turn.
Karen needs a drink of water. So the next fund we'll talk about tonight is the debt service fund. And this is where, what Karen was just talking about, all the magic happens with our wonderful taxpayers and what we're doing with their money. So this is what we had adopted in 1819 and where we plan to end. And they're pretty close to one another, not much difference there. And then our proposed budget for what we're proposing this evening is what she's kind of already covered. Our revenues will be mostly the, let's see. So we won't have a bond sale. And our expenditures, so our revenues and our expenditures will just be the final payment of our current bond that we have, well, our first current bond. So we'll be paying that off here in December. And then our first payment on our new ones then will roll in next year too. So that's what those are. So pretty straightforward with that. This is our 4-year forecast, so more about what Karen was talking about, where we're budgeting this year, and then you can see the revenues and expenditures rolling through. The revenues are our tax collections to match what we need to make our debt service payments for our principal and interest for paying off our first one and then going forward from year to year. So not a lot of exciting stuff going on there, but it's pretty straightforward. So any questions on debt service? This is the fund, our Associated Student Body Fund. This is all the good stuff that happens in our schools that is student-driven. And so to get to this point, to what you see here, there was a lot of work done by the students. Each club had to meet and propose what they wanted to do for raising funds and spending funds for this next school year. And they spoke with their advisors and they spoke with the larger ASB group. And they do this budget. All I do is take what they've turned in and review it and put it here. So this is all student work here and all the good things that they plan on doing next year. The high schools are, of course, our largest. There's 3 high schools, and most of that is the 2 larger high schools. The Henderson Bay High School does have an active ASB, although much smaller, and they have some really fun clubs like Magic Club. They have some good ones. The middle schools, the 4 middle schools, those students are all learning what it means to be an ASB and how to make that work and follow within the rules of how that all works. And then a couple of the elementary schools have very small ones, and they really aren't student-driven. The principal uses those funds. And then we build in some capacity there in case something big happens. And we also have to do a 4-year projection for the ASB, and pretty straightforward the way that we did that. It's partly driven by our students, how many students we have, and how much we're spending on ASB per student. Funds things like ASB cards and yearbooks and the things that you see, more participation in sports and extracurricular activities, which also run through this. Yes, please.
A couple years ago, Karen, we were talking about some of the budgets were getting a little bit up there, and we were talking about maybe trying to have them start spending down some of that money, because obviously people are paying into these things, they want to see the money spent. And so I didn't, unless I've just missed it, is there a breakdown of like what's at the high school versus, because I know do you remember that a couple of years ago?
Yeah,
We were
and
talking about trying
that
to
was
pay
it.
some of it down.
We need to see when they close the books, what the
Yeah.
balances are in each of the
Yeah.
schools.
Yeah. I think the challenge is that a lot of the schools are earning funds throughout the year, and then some of them are spending during the summer. And so they're building up so that they have funds to do the things they need to do at the startup of the next school year. So it's kind of opposite of the way we're reporting. It looks like they have a lot of funds, but they need it as startup right at the beginning of the year. A lot of activities like assemblies and year kickoffs and sports, the bigger sports, football happening. Those things happen at the beginning of the year, and they need some of that contingency to get them started.
I'm just looking at it. Is that the beginning fund balance is 1.2 million, and the ending fund balance is 1.2 million. So their revenues almost completely offset their expenditures and I'm looking at that during the year, their revenues and expenditures net zero. So they're still starting off with over $1 million in their fund balance, which to me is quite
Combined.
combined.
Well, and we have
Yeah.
budget capacity built in there too.
Yeah.
5% of it is, of all the revenues is
And that
budget capacity we have set aside for things like a band trip or something that
Yeah.
may not have had all there's expenses that come up. So we have that capacity set aside. So that's some of what that $1 million is.
Okay.
Okay.
But Karen's right, a lot of it is, the beginning of the year, there are a lot of expenses that get incurred. Football's a big one. So they save up their money throughout the year.
Yeah,
And
it's
then-
gonna be a stupid question, but do they have a separate checking account for the ASB fund? Okay, so,
Well, they have we have a separate fund.
I know there's a
But it's
fund, I
not
just didn't know, like, when you pay something through the student body, do you do it with a warrant, or do you do an AC? Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a different set of warrants, so when you look at the warrants that you approve,
Yeah,
they have different numbers.
okay.
They're numbered differently, and it's
I was just wondering
different.
if it could be put into an interest-bearing account.
They do earn interest.
Oh, they did?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Perfect.
And then the interest is then allocated out to every single club at every single school.
Okay, okay, good.
Super fun.
And there isn't a requirement too, if you really want. Every year, we have to report the ending balances, so we have to post those to the, I believe they have to post them to the school sites, and then we also post them to the district website. But we have to report all of the ending balances for every club, every school. It's a requirement, came about a couple of years ago.
Where is that posted?
It's on the district website, it's ASB expenditures. And they also have to post their own on their school's website.
Okay.
August 31st every year. The next fun fund is our transportation vehicle fund. Currently, we have 62 large buses in our inventory and 35 small buses. And so next year, we are planning on purchasing 4 large buses, one with a flow-through or with extra storage capacity, and 4 small buses. And that's a different number than what you're used to seeing. Our normal inventory replacement on the buses is 3 of each year. The reason you're seeing 4 this year is we had, our risk management company loves us. We lost both a large bus and a small bus this year. And so the replacement is not happening until September timeframe. So of those 4 large buses and 4 small buses, 1 of each is a replacement of buses that we lost last year.
lost because they were in accidents?
They were accidents, yeah, yeah, they were totaled. So, that's part of what the replacement is, of why you're seeing 4 and you're used to seeing 3.
The 4-year forecast, again, is based on, again, with the 3 big buses each year and the 3 small buses each year, and that's sustainable.
We feel pretty good about that, and the money that we're getting from the state for depreciation will keep us going on being able to maintain that replacement cycle at least for the next 4 years.
Question?
I do have a question.
Yes, please.
It's probably back a few slides, but where does the pay-to-play money go? It's kept separate by sport, or is it one fund, or?
So pay to play, do you wanna, it's general fund.
I
It
thought
is
of
in
it
the
when we were
general
talking
fund.
about ASB, but I know it's
Yeah,
different.
it's in the general fund. What we do is we give that, as the dollars are collected, we give capacity to each of the schools within their athletic department. And then that is used to support transportation. And so we build that into the budget, so that there are offsets to help pay for transportation with those.
So it goes into a general, it's not like the tennis team keeps the money they collect or whatever.
All of the pay-to-play, they go to the school, but they go into the athletic, we call it our 09 sub-fund, but basically it's for athletics and extracurricular.
Is that the same with entry fee, like
Or it
for
goes back to the school.
football game, you pay to go into?
No.
That's ASB.
That's
That goes
ASB.
ASB.
Those
And then-
gate receipts go into the ASB and probably into their athletic.
Okay.
When we lose a bus because of an accident, do we receive replacement cost or actual cash value?
We receive, so they went back and they looked at how much we paid for the original buses. And I believe they gave us the replacement value. Well, they gave us the original investment, and then we have to come up with the difference between what it
So
costs.
we eat the inflation, is what you're saying.
And then if we want to do an upgrade on the bus, that too is our cost.
Right, right.
Okay. So,
I just want to add one editorial comment on the transportation, the vehicle replacement. It is such a pleasure to, again, see a district that's in full balance of this. You have a bunch of buses, they're aging over time, you get money back on each bus over time, but if it's well planned, you get enough money back to replace enough buses each year that you never face I've got a bunch of old buses that all need to be replaced at once out of local funds, and it is just a pure pleasure as a superintendent to watch this, and it's obviously been in play for quite some time.
Took Karen and
And,
her team a while.
I've spent too much of my career sort of trying to catch up with districts falling behind, and this one it's a real boon to the community, because the community, for all practical purposes, paid for these once, and then they let the system replenish them and keep the buses current and new without having to add more local money other than maybe we want some devices that they don't provide. So my compliments, it's just well done.
well, it was a long time coming. I think when I first started, I kept saying, I'm sorry, we have the oldest fleet in the state.
You didn't have that.
You didn't, I know where that one was.
But we spent we transferred many levy funds early on over to support buying new buses. And we finally reached the point where all of our buses are on all our frontline buses are on the depreciation. And so that's very helpful, so that now we can replace. We had one year where we had I don't know, 1 year where the buses that we ordered, the engine wasn't ready, and so they added to the 8. So there were 12 that came in, like back to back. But we had 1 year where we didn't get our buses until the following year.
We're approaching that
So
kind of expiration.
it's coming up.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
so we've been kind of trying to get a little bit extra so that we're a little ahead of the game.
Nice work.
That type of thing. So,
Okay.
okay,
August-
so just to wrap things up, on August 22nd at the board meeting, we will be asking you to adopt the budgets that you just saw. We'll ask for a public hearing. We will have a budget resolution, and the budget resolution will have the expenditure budgets for each fund, very similar to the past, but it will also have language about the budget forecasts, and we will have the budget forecasts, we'll update them and make you aware of the updates. And then we will also ask you to approve a levy spending plan for 2019-2020. So, any questions?
Thank you. Karen and Kelly, thank you very much. I guess as a board, if we have questions before the August 22nd, if we could feed those questions through Art, so that we can all see the responses to that, and then it would be reflected, highlighted in the August 22nd presentation. Okay.
I also really love the summary. It's so much easier to read than the 100 and some odd pages with all the
It is,
different
it's a very
categories.
nice condensed.
I'm also
Yes.
wondering if I could please have a copy of the previous school year summary,
The which one?
the last school year summary to compare.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be
Yes.
great, and I'll be here Friday, I think, yes. So
Okay.
I can pick it up Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
Any other things from you, Art? Okay. With that, the meeting is adjourned at 8:37.